How does a man go from losing his houses, cars, savings, and even his kids to sitting in a bank office while a manager stares at a screen from 1948 in shock? How can an old metal card from my grandfather do more for me than the entire legal system that let my ex and her lawyer boyfriend strip me bare? How they react when they learn what that account really is becomes the only part of this story that still makes sense to me. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Grant Ellis, and the morning my life finally broke looked very normal. I stood at the stove in the kitchen, watching scrambled eggs slowly firm in the pan. The old kettle whistled on the back burner. The house still smelled like the lemon cleaner I always used on Sunday nights. The clock over the fridge showed 6:20. It was quiet except for the soft sound of the kids' cartoons from the living room. Mia sat curled on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders. Caleb lay on the rug with his toy cars in a neat line. They both wore their school uniforms, shirts a little wrinkled from my clumsy ironing. I had packed their lunches already. The lunch boxes were lined up like small soldiers on the counter. Lena walked in with her phone in her hand, already in a fitted blazer and heels. She moved past me without a word at first, opened a cabinet, and reached for the good coffee beans. I watched her shake them into the grinder with quick, sharp movements. She looked like she was about to step into a meeting, not a family kitchen. She finally told me that I needed to hurry because today would be long, and she did not want to be late for court. I told her that I knew, and that I was packing snacks for the kids so they would not get hungry while we waited. She replied that the kids did not have to come for everything, and that Trent had explained the schedule. Her voice was flat, like she was talking about a work plan. I turned off the stove and set plates on the table. The kids came in when I called their names. Caleb climbed onto his chair and asked if I would be home when he got back from school. I told him gently that today was different, that after school he would go back to the house with Mom and I would go to my new place. His fork paused in the air. His small face pulled in confusion. He asked why. Mia looked at her plate and did not say anything. She already knew. Lena stepped in with her fast, bright tone. She told them that Mom and Dad had decided to live in different homes, that it would be better for everyone, and that they would get two of many things now. She added that Uncle Trent had said many families did this, and the kids turned out fine. I felt those words hit me harder than any punch. Uncle Trent. It slipped out of her mouth so easy. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee and counted my breaths. After breakfast, I helped Caleb with his shoes and checked Mia's backpack one more time. Lena told me not to baby them and said they needed to get used to new routines. She checked her watch and told the kids to grab their jackets. At the door, Caleb ran back and hugged my waist. He asked again if I would be there tonight. I told him that tonight he would be with Mom, but that I would see him soon. I kept my voice steady. I did not want him to see my hands shake. Lena watched this with a tight jaw. She said the kids would adjust faster if I did not make it dramatic. I nodded and said I understood. When the door closed behind them, the house became suddenly too quiet. I stood in the hallway, looking at the family pictures on the wall. There was the one of our wedding, another of Mia's first day of school, one of Caleb with cake all over his face. I realized I did not know which of these frames she would take, and which would end up in a box in some storage unit. I grabbed the small folder my own lawyer had given me. It held my copy of the proposed agreement. The folder felt thin. My life, pressed between a few sheets of paper. The drive to the courthouse took 30 minutes. I took the old truck because the newer family car was already in Lena's name. I had polished the dashboard the night before. It felt like I was saying goodbye to an old friend. The family court building was plain, low, and beige. The parking lot was full of cars, but the grass along the edges was patchy and tired. I walked up the steps slowly, clutching the folder. The air smelled like old paper and coffee when I stepped inside. My lawyer waited near the security line. His name was Victor. He was in his late 50s with a gray suit that looked like it had seen many long days. He shook my hand and asked how I was holding up. I told him that I was fine and that I just wanted what was fair for the kids. He sighed and replied that fairness looked different in court than in real life. He reminded me that the judge liked clean agreements and that fighting too hard could make things worse. He told me again that I should accept the deal and move on. We went to a small mediation room on the second floor. It looked like a cheap conference room. Long table, flickering fluorescent lights, a picture of some generic landscape on the wall. The air conditioner hummed loudly. Lena was already there, sitting straight with a neat stack of papers and her phone face down beside her. She gave me a brief nod, not a smile. She looked calm, like this was another item on her schedule. Next to her sat Trent. I had met him twice before, once at a school event, once when he dropped off the kids. He had introduced himself as someone who helped families with legal issues. Now he wore a dark suit and a small, confident smile. He was not my lawyer. He represented Lena's side and had helped prepare the agreement. He greeted me by my first name as if we were old friends. He asked if I found the place all right. His tone was light, almost cheerful. I answered that I did. The mediator, a woman with short hair and glasses, went over the process. She explained that today was about finalizing details and making sure everyone understood the terms. She spoke in a calm, practiced way, and her eyes moved back and forth between us like she was watching a slow tennis match. Victor started by saying that we appreciated the time and wanted to reach a peaceful end for the sake of the children. He sounded tired already. Then Trent spoke. He laid out the plan as if it were already settled. He described how Lena would keep the main house to provide stability for the kids. He explained that she should have the newer car because it was safer and more reliable for school runs and activities. He stated that I would move into my rental and take the older truck, which he called more suitable for my work. He went on about finances. He said that since my business had unstable income and Lena had a steady salary, she needed more control over the liquid assets to make sure bills were paid on time. He suggested that I accept a lower share of savings in exchange for a clean break. He talked about custody next. His tone stayed smooth. He described a schedule where the children spent most school nights with Lena and alternate weekends with me. He said this would give them structure and keep their school life simple. All the time he spoke, he kept his hands folded neatly on the table. He did not raise his voice. He used phrases like best interests and primary caregiver. He made it sound like I was agreeing to something generous. My head felt full. I looked at the printed pages and saw my name next to the words non-primary. It felt like a label on the back of a chair. I cleared my throat and said that I had been the one who took the kids to most doctor visits when Lena was working late. I reminded them that I had built my schedule around school runs for years. Trent nodded politely and replied that my involvement was valued, but the court also liked predictability. He said the proposed plan still gave me valuable parenting time. The mediator looked at me with soft eyes and asked if I understood. I said that I did. Victor leaned toward me. He whispered that this was the best deal we were likely to get and that dragging it out could make Lena less flexible. He reminded me that going to a full trial would cost more than I could afford. I looked at Lena. She met my eyes for a second. There was no anger there, just impatience. She asked if we could move forward because she needed to be at the office by afternoon. She added that the kids were already adjusting and that it would confuse them if we changed everything again. I felt a tightness in my chest. I thought of Mia's careful drawings on the fridge, of Caleb's small shoes by the door. I thought of them waking up in this house while I slept alone in a noisy rental. I also thought of the empty wallet in my pocket and the unpaid bills on my workbench. I told the mediator that I would agree. She asked me to say it clearly for the record. I repeated that I understood the agreement and that I accepted. My voice sounded far away to my own ears. The next part was just signatures. Papers slid across the table. Victor pointed where I should sign and date. I signed my own name again and again until the letters started to blur. Each signature felt like a piece of me scraping off. During a pause, Trent made a small comment. He said that it was good we were keeping things simple and that not many people in my position walked away with so much. The words sounded friendly, but I heard the edge under them. Lena did not correct him. She just kept signing. When it was over, the mediator gathered the papers and told us that the judge would review and stamp them later that day. She thanked us for being calm and cooperative. We stepped out into the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. People moved past us, other families with other folders and other stories. Victor shook my hand. He told me I had done the right thing for the children. He reminded me to set up my support payments on time. Then he hurried off to another case. I stood there for a moment with my thin folder in my hand. Lena and Trent were a few steps away, speaking in low voices. Lena checked her phone and laughed at something he said. They looked like colleagues leaving a conference, not like two people who had just cut a man out of his own home. I walked past them without speaking. I kept my eyes on the exit sign. I felt invisible in my own story. Outside, the sky was bright. Too bright. I had to squint as I walked down the steps. My truck waited where I had left it, old paint dull in the midday light. I climbed inside, closed the door, and sat with my hands on the steering wheel. My folder lay on the passenger seat, thin and light. It was all I had left from a house, 2 cars, savings, and a family I had tried to hold together. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. I drove without really seeing the road, just following the same streets I had driven for years, only this time I was not going back to the house. My new place was across town, in a low building with peeling paint and a broken light over the main door. The landlord called it affordable housing with character. The hall smelled like old cooking and dust. The stair rail shook under my hand. My apartment was on the second floor, one bedroom, a small kitchen, a living area with faded carpet. When I first saw it before the hearing, I had told myself it was only for a short time, just until I got back on my feet. Now, with the folder in my hand and my name on a fresh court agreement, it felt less temporary. I set the folder on the counter and stood in the middle of the room. The window looked out over the parking lot and a strip of road. Beyond that, there was a small grocery store and a laundromat. My things were still in boxes along one wall. I had moved them in over the last week, making trips at night when the kids were asleep at the house. I went to the nearest box and cut the tape. On top were some clothes, rolled in a hurry. Under them, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was a small metal card with rounded corners. My grandfather, Walter, had given it to me when I was 25. He had pressed it into my hand and told me to keep it in my wallet and not to use it unless it was a true emergency. Back then, I had smiled and thanked him, thinking it was just an old habit from another time. I pulled the card out now, stared at the worn stamp of Heritage Bank on it, then shook my head and set it on the counter with my keys. Whatever it was linked to, it could not change the papers I had just signed. I spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking. I folded my shirts onto a single shelf in the closet. I set my work boots by the door. I placed a few of the kids' drawings on the fridge. A stick figure family with my name over one of the taller shapes. A drawing of our old house with trees and a dog we never had. When it started to get dark, I heated a can of soup on the stove and ate it, standing up, leaning against the counter. The quiet pressed in. At the house, there would be homework sounds, Lena on a call in the dining room, the kids arguing lightly over the remote. Here there was only the hum of the fridge and muffled footsteps from the unit above. My phone buzzed. It was my sister, Elise. She asked how it had gone. I told her the basics. The house, the newer car, the savings, primary custody for Lena. Alternate weekends and one dinner a week for me. She sent a string of short messages after that, each one sharper than the last. She asked if my lawyer had even tried. She asked why Lena needed the bigger share when I had built my business around the kids for years. She asked how I could agree to see my children less because someone else had a smoother way of talking. I answered slowly, one line at a time. I said I did not want a long fight. I said I had been warned that pushing back could make things worse. I said I did not have the money to drag this through months of hearings. Elise asked if Lena was already with the new man. I stared at that message for a while. Then I wrote that his name was Trent, that he was a lawyer, and that he had been very helpful to her. She wrote back that helpful was one word for it, and that our grandfather would not like seeing his grandson treated this way. I looked over at the small metal card on the counter. For a moment I remembered Walter's rough hand on my shoulder, his quiet voice. Then the feeling passed. I told Elise I was tired and would call her later. She said she was there if I needed anything. The next few days felt like walking through fog. I went to work on a small renovation project across town. My hands knew what to do, even when my head was somewhere else. Measure twice, cut once, check the level, sweep the dust into neat piles. My client, an older couple, commented on how focused I seemed. I nodded and smiled, even though I could not remember half of what they said. In the evenings, if it was not my night with the kids, I sat in the apartment and listened to the sounds of other people's lives through the walls, laughter from one side, a television show on the other, doors opening and closing. On my first dinner visit, I picked up Mia and Caleb from the house. Lena stood in the doorway with her arms folded. She went over the schedule again, like I might forget. She reminded me when to bring them back and what homework Mia had to finish. As we walked to my truck, Mia looked back at the house. Caleb held my hand the whole way. He looked up and asked if the apartment had room for his train set. I told him we would make room. We spent the evening eating takeout at my small table and playing a board game on the floor. Mia seemed quiet but relaxed a bit when she saw I had put some of her drawings on the fridge. Caleb loved that he could jump from the couch to the rug without someone telling him not to. When I dropped them off later, Trent's car was in the driveway. He came to the door with Lena. She smiled politely at me, that tight smile she gave clients she did not like. Trent thanked me for bringing the kids back on time. He added that sticking closely to the schedule would help everyone adjust. He sounded like he was talking about a project, not people. Mia hugged me quickly. Caleb hung on longer, then let go when Lena cleared her throat. I walked back to my truck in the half-dark, feeling like a visitor who had stayed too long. A week later, there was an evening event at the kids' school, a small art show and a bake sale. I had them that afternoon, so I drove all three of us there in the truck. We walked down the hallway lined with paintings and clay animals. Mia squeezed my hand when she saw her picture of a city skyline on the wall. I took out my phone and took a photo of her standing next to it. She smiled, a real one this time. Then I saw Lena and Trent walk in at the other end of the hall. She wore a bright dress and smiled widely at other parents. Trent carried a tray of neatly arranged cookies. They looked like a polished couple coming to a work event. We met near the juice table. Lena said she was glad I brought the kids early. Trent greeted me by name and said he had helped the school with a small legal issue recently. He joked that he was already becoming part of the community. One of the teachers came over and thanked him for some paperwork he had done. She glanced at me and asked if I was helping out with the construction side. I started to explain that I had my own business and had done some work for the school in the past, but she was already turning back to ask Trent another question. I stood there with a plastic cup of juice in my hand, listening to them talk about plans for a new fundraiser. Mia stayed close to Lena's side. Caleb tugged at my sleeve and pointed at the table with cupcakes. On the way out to the parking lot, another parent, a man from Mia's class, walked up to Lena and Trent. He shook Trent's hand and said he had heard about the recent tough situation and was glad Lena had someone who understood the system. He turned to me and asked if I was keeping busy with jobs. The tone was kind, but it carried that same soft message. You are the one who is lucky to be allowed near this. Mia drifted ahead, listening but not speaking. Caleb ran circles around us, unaware. Later that week, I went back to the school to drop off some forms. In the parking lot, I saw Lena's friend Carla talking with another group of parents. She waved me over. She asked how I was settling into the new place. I said it was fine. She smiled and said that Lena had told her I was a hands-on dad, but not really a planner. She said it was probably for the best that someone like Trent was helping organize things now, since he knew how to work with courts and banks. The other parents nodded. One of them said it must feel like a relief to let the experts handle the big stuff. They seemed to think they were comforting me. I wanted to say that I had handled big things for years, that I had saved for down payments, negotiated with suppliers, built a business one late night at a time, held our family together while Lena took night courses and chased promotions. I wanted to tell them about the months when I slept 4 hours a night so I could pour concrete in the morning and still make parent evenings. Instead, I said that I was happy the kids had many people who cared about them. It sounded like something you say when you lose and want to keep some pride. That night, after work, my sister came by the apartment for the first time. She brought a casserole and a small plant in a plastic pot. She looked around and shook her head at the bare walls and the low ceiling. She asked where the rest of my things were. I told her that most of the furniture stayed with the house, that it was easier for the kids that way. I said I did not need much. She sat at the small table and studied me for a long moment. Then she asked straight out how the deal ended up so uneven. I told her again about the advice from Victor, about the warnings he gave me. I told her about Trent's careful words in the mediation room. I tried to explain how tired I was, how the thought of a long fight felt heavier than the thought of signing. Elise listened with her arms crossed. She reminded me of all the times I had stepped in for Lena when work called her away. She listed the weekends I had the kids alone while Lena went to conferences. She asked why none of that seemed to matter when it came time to divide time and money. I had no good answer. She looked at the small metal card on the counter and picked it up. She asked what it was. I told her it was from our grandfather, that it was some old bank card he wanted me to keep. She raised an eyebrow and said, Walter never did anything small, and that I should at least ask the bank what it meant. I shrugged and said I would think about it. She put the card back down and told me one more thing before she left. She said that Lena had a right to a new life, but that there was a difference between moving on and writing the person who helped you out of the story. She said she did not like how Trent spoke about me, like I was a problem that had been finally solved. After she went home, I washed the 2 plates we had used and set them in the drying rack. I dried my hands on a worn towel and looked around the small kitchen. On the counter lay the court folder, the plant from Elise, and the metal card from Walter. Outside, a car door slammed and someone laughed in the parking lot. I turned off the light and went to bed, listening to the faint noise from the street and wondering when exactly I had turned from a partner into someone people spoke about in past tense. A week after the hearing, the first time I truly felt how empty my account was, I was standing in the checkout line at a small grocery store near my apartment. I had a basket with basic things: bread, milk, eggs, rice, a small pack of meat, some fruit for the kids' next visit. Nothing special. There was a young couple in front of me talking about their holiday plans. Behind me, an older woman leaned on her cart and hummed along with the music from the store speakers. When it was my turn, I set everything on the belt and waited. The cashier scanned my items and told me the total. I pulled out my regular bank card and slid it through. The small screen blinked, then showed a short message that the payment could not be approved. The cashier asked if I wanted to try again. I said yes. Maybe I typed the code wrong. I tried again, slower. Same message. A line was forming behind me now. I could feel the weight of eyes on my shoulders. The cashier's smile faded a little. She asked if I had another card. I pulled out my business debit card. Most of the money that used to move through it was gone now, but I hoped there was enough for one small trip. I slid it. The screen blinked again. Same message. The older woman behind me shifted her weight. Someone coughed. The young couple, now at the end of the lane, glanced back briefly, then looked away. The cashier said softly that sometimes the system glitched and suggested I check with my bank. She asked if I wanted her to put the things aside. For a second, I almost walked away and left it all. Instead, I took a slow breath and told her I would put a few things back. I took out the meat and the fruit and set them aside. She tried the card again with the smaller total. This time, it worked. I carried the lighter bags out to the parking lot, feeling heavier than when I went in. I loaded them into the truck and sat behind the wheel for a while without starting the engine. My hand rested on the steering wheel, but my mind was back in the courtroom, in that small room where people talked about my life like it was a budget line. When I got back to the apartment, I went straight to the old laptop on the small table and logged into my online banking. The screen showed my main account balance, almost at zero. There were automatic withdrawals coming soon, rent, support, bills. A few small payments from clients trickled in, but not enough to cover everything. I checked my business account. It was slightly better, but work had slowed after the separation. A couple of regular clients quietly picked bigger firms when they heard I had a lot going on at home. People do not say it that way, but you can hear it. I closed the laptop and rubbed my eyes. On the counter, next to my keys, the small metal card from Walter lay where I had left it. Elise's words echoed in my head, about how he never did anything small and how I should at least ask the bank. I picked the card up and turned it over in my fingers. The metal was cool and worn on the edges. The stamp of Heritage Bank was faded, but still clear. On the back, there was a string of numbers and Walter's name in small engraved letters. I put it in my wallet. The next morning, after finishing a short job at a client's house, I drove downtown instead of back to the apartment. The main branch of Heritage Bank sat on a corner with a wide stone front and tall, narrow windows. It looked like it belonged to another time. The newer glass buildings around it made it look even older. Inside, the lobby was high-ceilinged and quiet. There was the soft sound of printers somewhere in the back and the low murmur of people talking at desks. Polished floor tiles reflected the light. I took a number and waited on a wooden bench. A young man in a suit helped an older couple at one desk. At another, a woman in a navy jacket was explaining something to a man in work clothes who kept scratching his head. When my number came up, I went to the nearest teller. She smiled and asked how she could help. I told her I had an old card from a family member and I wanted to know if it was still valid. She asked to see it. I handed it over. Her smile changed slowly as she turned it in her hand, studying the front and back. She said she had not seen one like that in person and asked if she could call her manager. I said of course. She picked up the phone and spoke quietly, using words I could not hear. Then she looked back at me and asked me to wait a moment. A man in his 50s with dark hair and a calm face appeared from a door behind the row of tellers. He wore a name tag that read R. Patel, branch manager. He greeted me politely and held out his hand for the card. I handed it over. He turned it, checked the numbers, and then looked at me in a more serious way. He asked for my name and a piece of identification. I gave him my driver's license. He studied the license and the card together. Then he asked if I had a few minutes to step into his office to go over something in private. My stomach tightened. I asked if there was a problem. He said not exactly, but that the card connected to an older system and he did not want to discuss it at the teller window. I followed him through a glass door into a small office with a desk, 2 chairs, and a framed photo of his family on a shelf. A plant in the corner leaned toward the light. He sat at his computer, typed in a string of numbers from the card, and used a small digital reader to scan it. The screen lit up with a green bar, then a list of numbers and words I could not read from where I sat. At first, his face showed the neutral look of someone doing a routine check. Then his expression shifted. His eyebrows rose a little. His mouth pressed into a slight line. He leaned closer to the screen. He asked me to confirm my grandfather's full name and date of birth. I gave them. He asked me some questions only a family member would know. Small details about the town Walter had lived in, the factory where he had worked, the name of my father. He was careful but respectful. When he seemed satisfied, he sat back in his chair and looked at me differently. There was a new weight in his gaze. He said that what he was about to tell me might sound strange, and that he would also give me written confirmation. He explained that the card was linked to a very old account opened in 1948 in Walter's name, at this same bank. Over the years, the account had changed form, moved through internal systems, and become part of a larger structure. But the link to the card and to Walter's family had stayed. He said that about 15 years ago, Walter had added instructions and set up a special condition. The account and related assets were to stay untouched in a certain way until a future family member met a hardship test. If that test was met, the bank was to reach out to the cardholder and start a process. I asked what hardship test meant. He replied carefully that it combined several things: personal income dropping below a certain level, legal changes in family status, and significant loss of property or housing. He said that earlier that month, a series of reports and data checks had triggered an alert on their side connected to my name. He said it took time for these systems to line up, and that the bank had been preparing a packet to contact me. My visit had simply arrived before the letter they would have sent. I sat in silence. The words felt heavy in the air. I asked if this was just a small savings account that had been left alone. I said that would already help. He shook his head slowly and turned the monitor slightly, just enough for me to see the outline of the screen. There were rows of numbers, dates going back decades, and a balance line that made my throat tighten. It was more money than I had ever seen directly linked to my name, and there were also references to something else: a holding company with my grandfather's surname, small notes about properties and shares. He did not go into full detail. Instead, he said that it was not a simple checking account. He said Walter had been very patient and very careful over many years. He then pulled open a drawer and took out a plain envelope with my name written on a printed label. He said they had prepared this based on Walter's instructions and the recent trigger. Inside, he explained, was a summary of the structure, the conditions, and my options. He told me that he strongly suggested I take the envelope, read it somewhere private, and consider getting independent advice from a lawyer or accountant I trusted. He said that this kind of long-term planning could be powerful, but it also came with responsibilities. I listened to his calm voice and felt a strange mix of shame and relief. Shame that I had stood in a grocery line worrying about bread while this existed with my name on it. Relief that something from Walter's quiet life had reached out across all these years to place a hand on my shoulder again. I asked him one more question. I asked why Walter had never told me the full story. Mr. Patel said that some people from the older generation trusted structures more than conversations. They believed that if they talked too much, others might try to grab what was not meant for them. He said that in his notes, Walter had written that the world changes fast, and that he wanted his grandson to have a chance to stand up for himself if others tried to walk over him. I stared at the envelope in his hand. The room felt very still. He slid the envelope across the desk to me. I took it. The paper felt heavier than it looked. He added that the bank would not move any funds or make any changes without my clear instructions, and that everything would be documented. He said their job was to follow the written plan Walter left, not to interfere in family matters. I thanked him. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. When I stepped back out into the lobby, the normal sounds of the bank, the printers, the light talk at desks seemed far away. I walked out into the bright daylight holding the envelope and my wallet. In the truck, I sat for a long time with the engine off. Cars moved in and out of parking spaces around me. A bus pulled up across the street. People went about their day without knowing that in one small cab of an old truck, a man was staring at a piece of paper that shifted the ground under his feet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I checked the screen. It was a message from Lena. She wrote that the kids' school had announced a new extra program that cost money and that she expected me to cover my share on top of regular support. She added that if I could not keep up, it might be better for the kids if the schedule changed and they saw me less often to avoid disappointment. I read the message twice. Then I looked at the envelope on the seat beside me and the worn metal card in my hand. Something inside me became very clear and very quiet. For months, maybe years, I had moved through life trying not to make things harder, always taking the hit so someone else could stay comfortable. In the courtroom, at the kitchen table, in the school parking lot, I had accepted the story that I was the weaker side, the part that could be cut away without much cost. Now I held proof that someone, long before any of this, did not see me that way at all. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. Instead of going straight home, I turned toward the edge of town, where a row of storage units sat behind a chain-link fence. In one of those units were boxes from Walter's old farmhouse, things I had promised myself I would sort when I had time. The sky was pale and flat above the highway. My hands felt steady on the wheel. For the first time since the hearing, my mind was not only counting losses. It was also counting pieces on the board that other people had not seen. The storage place sat behind a chain-link fence, the kind you see everywhere. A faded sign listed unit numbers and a phone number to call for rentals. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled in. I had rented a unit there a year earlier when Walter's old farmhouse was emptied out and the place went on the market. Back then, I had packed his things in a rush, telling myself I would sort them someday. It felt strange that someday was now. I parked by my unit and stepped out. The air smelled like dust and hot metal. A train horn sounded faintly in the distance. My lock was still on the door, a simple padlock with rust around the edges. I turned the key and slid the door up. Cool air and the scent of cardboard drifted out. Inside, boxes were stacked up to my chest. Some had neat labels from the moving company. Others were old fruit crates Walter had reused, with his handwriting on the sides. There was a small wooden chair from the farmhouse kitchen, a rolled-up rug, a lamp with a cracked shade. I stepped in and closed the door halfway to shut out the glare. The light that filtered in made stripes on the concrete floor. I started with the boxes marked study. Walter had always called his small room with a desk and shelves his study, even though it was more of a corner with a window that stuck in the winter. Inside the first box were books, manual for old machines, almanacs, a dictionary with a broken spine. In the second box I found notebooks, leather-bound and worn. Walter's handwriting filled the pages in slow, careful lines. I set aside a third box that felt heavier and had no label. When I opened it, I found binders and a metal lockbox. The binders held copies of old account statements, some from Heritage Bank, some from other places. The numbers were modest in the early years, then grew slowly, line by line. The lockbox had a key taped to the bottom. Inside, there were copies of legal documents, a small stack of letters, and a picture of Walter standing in front of the factory where he had worked most of his life. Behind him, the building looked tired even then. One letter had my name on it. The ink had faded a little, but his writing was clear. He had written it when I was a teenager. He wrote that he knew the world could be unfair, especially to people who did not shout the loudest. He wrote that he did not want his grandson to live at the mercy of others' moods and stories. He wrote that he was building something slow and quiet, and that one day I would understand. I sat on an upside-down crate and read the letter twice. The storage unit was silent except for the distant sound of a truck backing up somewhere outside. I went through more papers. I found a simple diagram of a company with Walter's last name in its title, arrows pointing to assets. Small shares in a local factory, bonds, a note about an apartment building, a line about secured loan, office block on Grant Street. There were handwritten notes explaining why he chose things that might seem boring but solid. The farmhouse itself was still standing on the edge of town, waiting for a buyer. After closing the unit and locking it again, I drove out there. The road turned from asphalt to gravel, then to a cracked lane lined with dry grass. The farmhouse looked smaller now, paint peeling, porch steps sagging. A for sale sign leaned slightly to one side near the driveway. I still had a key. The real estate agent had let me keep it to show the place when needed. The front door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, with a hint of old coffee and wood. Walter's study was mostly empty now, the shelves bare. I carried in the binders, the lockbox, and the envelope from Mr. Patel and spread everything out on the floor where the desk used to be. Sunlight slid across the worn boards. I opened the envelope from the bank. Inside was a summary, typed in careful language. It explained that the old account had become part of a trust structure. It named the holding company and listed a few key assets. A bundle of local mortgages, some long-term bonds, stakes in 2 commercial buildings, and cash reserves. One of the buildings was on a street name I recognized right away. It was the one where Trent's firm rented office space. The note said the holding company had bought a share of the loan on that building some years back as part of an investment package, and that it could be moved under certain conditions. Another entry listed a mortgage for a house in the newer part of town. The address matched the one Lena had moved to after the separation. I stared at that line for a long time. The document said the mortgage had been bundled with others and placed into this structure. It did not give me magical power, but it did give me a say if I chose to exercise it. There was also a section about the hardship trigger. It described, in dry words, how the bank system watched for certain changes, loss of property, changes in family status, income drops, public records of court orders. When enough of these lined up around a named family member, the bank flagged the trust for review. In the margins of one printed page, I saw a note in Walter's own handwriting. It said simply, "If they push him into a corner, he will have somewhere to step." I felt my throat tighten. I rubbed my thumb over the ink. I did not feel joy. Not yet. Mostly I felt something like a quiet anger that had cooled into resolve. All this time, I had sat in meetings and parking lots believing I had no tools, no leverage, nothing but my willingness to give up more so others would not be upset. Yet here was proof that someone had believed I might need to stand up one day and had planned for it. I took out my phone and took pictures of the key pages. Then I called someone I had not spoken to in months. Nora had been in my class in school. Back then, she was the one who finished math tests early and helped others without making them feel slow. Now she ran a small accountant office above a strip of shops on the south side of town. We had kept loose contact over the years. She had done my business taxes a few times. She answered on the second ring. I told her I had found some complex old financial papers from my grandfather and that I needed someone who could explain them in simple terms. She asked if everything was all right. I said I was not sure, but that things might be about to change. She told me to bring whatever I had and come by the next afternoon. Her office was above a nail salon and a small electronics shop. The stairs creaked. A little sign with her name and accounting services hung over the door. Inside, the office was clean and simple. 2 desks, a filing cabinet, a tall plant, and a coffee machine that looked older than it should. Nora greeted me with a brief hug and a steady look. She asked about the kids in a gentle way, not the light tone people use when they just want to say something nice. I told her the basics. She did not rush to fill the silence. Then I placed the bank summary, Walter's notes, and the copies of trust papers on her desk. I told her about the meeting with Mr. Patel and the trigger from 1948. She put on her glasses and started reading. Her eyes moved fast over the lines. From time to time, she made a small sound, a hum, or tapped a pen against the table. She asked a few questions as she went. Dates, names, confirmation of addresses. After about an hour, she leaned back and took off her glasses. She said that my grandfather had been patient in a way most people are not. He had built a slow, solid base over decades and then tied it to a set of rules that protected it from sudden grabs. She explained that the trust was separate from marital property. It had never been part of mine and Lena's shared assets, which meant the recent court agreement did not touch it. She said that some of the assets, like the bonds and part of the cash, could support me directly if I chose. Others, like the mortgages and notes on buildings, gave me influence rather than simple money. She pointed to the line about the office building where Trent's firm had space and the one about Lena's house. She explained that if I took control of certain parts of the holding company now, within the rules, I would be legally in a position similar to a bank. Not a landlord, but a creditor. I would not own their homes or offices, but if they chose to play games, they would be doing it while owing payments to a structure with my name on it. I sat with that for a moment. The idea did not make me feel powerful in an exciting way. It made me feel calm. I asked her what she thought I should do. She said it depended on my goal. If my plan was to make their lives hard just to pay them back, I could push in certain ways, but that might not help my relationship with the children. If my plan was to stop being a target and to make sure I could protect my time with Mia and Caleb, then the trust gave me tools to do that quietly. She also said I should speak to a lawyer who understood family law and trusts working together. She gave me 2 names. One of them was Amira, someone she had worked with before. Before I left, Nora said something that stayed with me. She said that numbers were not emotional. They just showed the shape of choices people had made over time. She said these papers showed that Walter had chosen to believe I might one day need help standing my ground and that I should not waste that belief on fear. That evening, during my next dinner with the kids, we went to the small playground near the lake. The sun was low, turning the water gold. The swings creaked as children moved back and forth. The air smelled like cut grass. Mia walked beside me quietly, kicking at a small stone. Caleb ran ahead and climbed onto the play structure, shouting to me to watch. Mia finally asked if I was angry with Mom. I told her the truth as best as I could. I said I was sad about how things had turned out, and that I did not agree with everything that had happened, but that I did not want her to feel like she had to choose a side. I said my job was to be her dad, not to ask her to be a judge. She nodded, not quite looking at me. She said that Mom and Trent sometimes spoke about me like I did not understand grown-up things, and that it made her stomach hurt. She said Caleb repeated phrases he heard, and she did not know how to answer him. I listened and felt that same quiet anger rise again, controlled but clear. I told her that people could be wrong about others, even when they sounded sure. I said that she did not have to take every sentence she heard as the whole truth. I told her that I was working on some things and that my only goal was to be steady for her and her brother. On the drive back to Lena's house, the kids fell asleep in the back seat. The streetlights slid over their faces. When we pulled into the driveway, Trent's car was there again. Lena opened the door when I knocked. She thanked me in a brisk tone for bringing them back on time. She said that Trent had suggested a new plan for school breaks that would give the kids more structure at her place. She wanted to talk about adjusting the schedule again. I listened to her list, to the way she used words like stability and consistency, all centered around her home and her routine. I watched her eyes flick toward Trent, standing just behind her, like she wanted his silent approval of every phrase. For the first time since all of this began, I did not just nod and agree to think about it. I told her calmly that I would not discuss major changes on the doorstep, and that any changes would go through proper channels from now on. I said that I wanted to be fair, but that my time with the children was not a loose piece they could move whenever it suited them. She looked surprised, then annoyed. Trent stepped forward slightly and said we could all stay flexible if I was reasonable. His tone carried the polite firmness of someone used to shaping outcomes. I told him that I would be reasonable. I also told him that I now had my own advice and my own resources, and that I was done treating my role as something everyone else could rearrange without my say. Their expressions changed in small ways. A flicker in Lena's eyes. A tiny pause before Trent replied that, of course, I had that right. I watched the kids walk past them into the warm light of the hallway. Then I turned and walked back to my truck. The night air felt colder than before. But under that cold, there was something solid in me that had not been there a few weeks earlier. I was still the same man who made eggs in the morning and checked homework in the evening, but now I also knew that I did not have to stand in every room as the weakest person just because others spoke louder. The next step was not a grand move. It was a phone call. After leaving Lena's doorway that night, I sat in my truck for a long time. The dashboard light washed over the steering wheel. The court folder lay on the passenger seat next to a newer stack of copies from the trust and the notes I had taken at Nora's office. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number Nora had given me for Amira. I hesitated, then pressed call. A calm, steady voice answered. I introduced myself and said that Nora had suggested I reach out, that I had a family case, a trust structure, and a sense that something had gone wrong in the first agreement. I said I needed someone who could see the whole picture. Amira listened without cutting in. When I finished my brief explanation, she said that she handled complex family situations often and that she would need to read everything before giving real advice. She offered an appointment in a few days at her office, so a few days later I found myself in another small conference room, this one cleaner and brighter than the mediation room had been. The chairs were comfortable, the tables smooth, the walls lined with simple frames showing calm landscapes. Amira sat across from me with a notepad and a laptop. She wore a simple blouse and had her hair pulled back. There was nothing flashy about her, but when she focused on a document, she seemed to see through it. I laid out my folders: the divorce agreement, the visitation schedule, printed messages from Lena, notes and summaries from the bank, Walter's letters, and the trust papers Nora had organized. I started at the beginning. I told her how Lena and I had met, how I had structured my work around our family, how things changed when Lena's career rose and she met Trent. I described the mediation, the pressure to settle, the way Trent had framed me as unstable in income and less capable of handling the house and main custody. Then I told her about the grocery store, the old metal card, the meeting with Mr. Patel, the trip to the storage unit, and the long notes from Walter. I told her what Nora had explained about the trust and the assets linked to it. Amira listened, sometimes asking for dates, sometimes asking me to slow down and repeat exact phrases people had used. When she looked through the text messages between Lena and me, she read them in silence, her eyes hardening just slightly as she went. After a long while, she closed the last folder and rested her hands on it. She said that several things were clear. First, she said, the trust and its assets were separate property. They had never been part of my shared marital estate. That meant the existing agreement did not reach them, no matter what Lena now thought or said. Second, she said the original settlement might have issues. She pointed out that Trent had served as Lena's personal partner and as a legal guide in ways that blurred lines. She said that if he had influenced my decisions while also positioning himself as an expert in the room, there could be a conflict worth raising. Third, she said the messages showed a pattern. Lena and Trent had spoken about me in ways that undercut my role as a parent. Some messages hinted at limiting my access if I did not meet extra demands. Others joked about me not being able to keep up and about moving the schedule whenever it suited them. To Amira, that looked like more than just frustration. It looked like a plan to reduce my presence over time. She leaned back and told me gently that none of this would be quick or simple. The court system moved at its own pace, but she said that if my goal was clear, to protect my role in my children's lives and to bring more balance to the agreement, then we had a path. She laid out a simple outline of what could be done. She said we could file a motion to modify custody and support based on new financial realities and concerns over how Lena and Trent were handling my relationship with the kids. We could also request the court to review the process of the original settlement, highlighting the conflict of interest and the pressure that had been placed on me. She said we would not threaten anyone. We would simply bring facts. Then she asked a question that mattered more than I realized at first. She asked what I wanted at the end, in plain words. I thought about that carefully. I told her that I wanted my children to know that I had not walked away. I wanted a schedule that recognized how present I had been and still was. I wanted financial terms that did not leave me one step from empty every month, while Lena and Trent spoke about me like a burden. I did not want to take anything from my kids. I did not want to see Lena fail as a person. I only wanted the weight spread more honestly and my dignity restored. Amira nodded slowly. She said that was clear enough for her. After that, things became practical. Over the next weeks, we met several times. Each time, I brought more paper, school notes, screenshots from the family group chat where people casually acted as if Trent was the main parent now, calendar logs showing how often I had stepped in when Lena had last-minute work, records of payments made on time, even when my main account had almost nothing. Amira and her small team organized everything into binders. One binder for financials, one for messages and behavior, one for the trust and the holding company. Parallel to that, with Nora's help, I met again with Mr. Patel and then with a representative from a title company that worked with the bank. Those meetings happened in quiet rooms with neutral walls. We did not slam any doors, we just signed papers. The main action was technical, not dramatic. Some assets inside Walter's structure were repositioned, names on certain internal documents changed, moving control in ways the trust allowed once the hardship trigger had been confirmed. One package of loans was moved under a new shell company, with me listed as manager. Among those loans were the mortgage on Lena's house and a note tied to the office building that housed Trent's firm. The title company representative explained each step using slow, clear language. He made sure I understood that I was not seizing anything. I was becoming the person on the other side of some payment streams. He repeated that everything was on record, that signatures were witnessed, that nothing was hidden. I listened carefully and signed where he indicated. I did not feel a rush of power. I felt like someone slowly picking up tools that had been left for him in a locked shed, finally using them for the job they were meant for. Through all of this, I kept seeing the kids on my scheduled days. I did not change my tone with them. I did not speak badly about their mother or about Trent. Instead, I kept my focus on routines: homework, simple meals, walks, small jokes. From time to time, Mia would ask small questions. She might ask why Mom seemed tense after getting certain letters, or why Trent stayed up late at the dining table with piles of paper. I would answer carefully, saying that there were grown-up things being sorted out and that it was not her job to carry them. I told her, again and again in different words, that none of it was her fault and that my place in her life was not at risk. One evening, when the kids were not with me, I received a long message from Lena. She wrote that she had been served with papers she did not fully understand, that there were mentions of the trust and questions about the first settlement. She wrote that Trent thought I was trying to overturn everything. Her words were sharp, full of frustration. I read the message twice. Then I replied in measured lines. I wrote that I was not trying to erase her, or hurt the children, that I was only asking the court to look again at how the weight was divided and at how my role was being handled. I wrote that I would keep communication polite and clear, and that most details should now go through the proper channels. She wrote back that Trent said I was playing a game I could not win. I did not answer that part. Amira filed the motion soon after. The court clerk stamped it on a day when the hallway was full of people and the air smelled like old paint. There was no music, no drama. Just a new date on a paper. A hearing several weeks away in the main county courthouse, not the small room where we had first settled. During those weeks, Lena's tone and messages shifted from casual to tense. She stuck closer to the schedule, no longer suggesting sudden changes with the easy confidence she had used before. Trent's responses became shorter, more formal. At work, I focused on the projects I still had. Sawdust still fell on floors. Measurements still had to be right. Life did not pause just because a legal process moved forward in the background. In the evenings, I sometimes sat at my small table and looked at the 3 binders Amira had assembled. One held the words other people had thrown at me, organized now into a clear picture instead of random cuts. One held the proof of my steady presence as a father. One held the quiet power of Walter's planning, translated into modern forms. I found myself feeling less like a man who had been pushed out of his own life and more like someone standing in a doorway, deciding who and what would get to pass through next. Elise came by again one night with another casserole. She had a way of showing care with food because that was what she knew how to give between long shifts at the hospital. She asked how things were going. I told her about the trust steps as far as I understood them, about the upcoming hearing, about Amira's calm way of looking at the judge straight in the eye during our practice runs. Elise listened with a mix of relief and anger on my behalf. She said that our grandfather would probably say I took too long to use what he built. Then he would clap me on the shoulder and tell me it was better late than never. She said that whatever happened next, at least I was not just taking hits with my hands at my sides anymore. The night before the hearing, I ironed my one good shirt at the narrow ironing board in my apartment. The board wobbled, but the fabric smoothed under the heat. I polished my shoes until they shone more than they had in years. I set my alarm, even though I knew I would wake before it rang. In the morning, I dressed in that shirt and my best pair of dark pants. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The lines on my face were sharper than they used to be. There was gray at my temples that had not been there 5 years ago, but my eyes were steady. On the table by the door lay the 3 binders and a slim, sealed envelope from Mr. Patel with the bank's formal statements. I stacked them carefully and slid them into a plain briefcase I had borrowed from Nora. It felt strange to carry a briefcase instead of a tool bag, but the weight of it was right for the day ahead. When I stepped out of my apartment, the air was cool and clear. The parking lot showed the usual mix of old cars and 1 or 2 newer ones. I unlocked my truck, placed the briefcase on the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel. For a moment, I rested my hands on the steering wheel and thought about the path from the morning at the stove to this morning. About the scrambled eggs, the mediation room, the empty grocery account, the metal card, the storage unit, the farmhouse, the accountant's office, the trust papers, the late-night messages. Then I started the engine and drove toward the main county courthouse, the building where people came to make their stories official in the eyes of the law. The main county courthouse felt bigger on the inside than it looked from the street. High ceilings, polished floor, voices echoing off stone. Amira walked beside me, holding her own folder, moving with quiet purpose. In the hearing room, Lena and Trent sat at the other table. She looked tense, fingers tight around a pen. He looked controlled, but his eyes kept flicking toward the judge's bench. When the judge came in, everyone stood. We sat again, and the world narrowed to that room. Amira spoke first. She laid out the messages and logs, the times they tried to push my visits aside, the way my name was used as if I were unreliable. She did it without heat, just facts and dates. Then she presented the envelope from Mr. Patel. The judge read the bank's statement, the trust terms, the hardship trigger, the separate nature of the assets. When Amira explained how control of certain mortgages and notes had shifted under long-standing rules, the room went very quiet. The judge adjusted custody, granting me joint legal rights and much more time. Support was corrected. There was a warning about future interference. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Mia and Caleb held my hands while Lena and Trent stayed behind, staring at papers they could no longer shape.